In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, the arrival of the Canadian Rock Machine in Australia sparked a violent rivalry with the local rebels MC. The Rock Machine, already known for its brutal history in Canada, decided to expand its reach in 2008 by establishing a chapter in Perth. However, this bold move didn't sit well with the rebels, and what began as a clash over territory quickly escalated into a full-blown war, with firebombings, assassination attempts, and violent confrontations. This is the story of the war between the Rock Machine and the rebels in Australia. To understand how the Rock Machine Motorcycle Club came to be in Australia, we need to rewind to Canada. Rock Machine was founded in the late 1986 by Salvatore Cazzetta and his brother Giovanni. At the time, Cazzetta had just broken away from the Hells Angels after a brutal event known as the Lennoxville Massacre, in which the Hells Angels turned on their own members and executed several of them, then dumped their bodies into St. Lawrence River. Cazzetta said that the massacre was an unforgivable breach of code, so he decided to break away from the Hells Angels and started the Rock Machine MC. The Rock Machine grew in Montreal, and for a while, it seemed like they were on the right path, as tensions with the Hells Angels were pretty low due to Cazzetta's friendship with Maurice Boucher, the then president of the Hells Angels Quebec chapter. However, the peace didn't last. In 1994, Cazzetta was jailed for drug trafficking charges, which left the Rock Machine without strong leadership, and Boucher took that opportunity to weaken them. Boucher moved the Hells Angels puppet clubs into the drug markets of the Rock Machine, which eventually ignited the bloody Quebec biker war. I'll leave a link to that video at the end of this one. The war lasted from 1994 to 2002 and resulted in over 150 deaths, including civilians that were caught in the crossfire, and apparently, Boucher would pay up to $100,000 for executing a member of the Rock Machine. By the end of the war, the Rock Machine was severely weakened. They made the difficult decision to disband and patch over with the Bandidos Motorcycle Club in order to survive. However, the Bandidos themselves were soon plagued by their own internal conflicts. This left many ex-Rock Machine members stranded without a club. In 2008, a group of former Bandidos members, along with some ex-Mongols, decided to revive the Rock Machine. A second version of the Rock Machine was founded in Winnipeg, adopting the original black and platinum colors as their patch. Despite starting out as a smaller club, they quickly began to expand internationally. If you're watching this from Australia, there's a good chance you've heard the name Brent Wrecker, also known as The Rock. This guy didn't waste any time making waves in the Aussie motorcycle scene. Brent was already setting his sights high, claiming he was going to be Australia's biggest and baddest bikie, and he definitely wanted to look the part too, with tattoos covering him from head to toe. He'd say that while some people hang their art on walls, he wore his on his skin. According to his mom, Brent was just a regular kid growing up. But by the time he hit 17, he had his mind made up, and he told her that he was going to start his own motorcycle club. While Brent definitely had ambition, he wasn't alone in this. It wasn't just him who made moves to bring the Rock Machine to Australia. Several other prominent members of the motorcycle community were involved. They got on the phone with the Rock Machine in Canada and asked if they could set up shop in Australia. They agreed, and in 2008, the first Rock Machine chapter in Perth was officially formed, with Brent Wrecker stepping into the role of Sergeant-at-Arms. The Rock Machine started making some serious strides in Australia, and it didn't take long for another chapter to pop up in Sydney in early 2009. The Perth chapter alone had grown to over 20 members, and they had also expanded into Eastern Australia, setting up new chapters with around 60 members in total, including those from the Sydney chapter. On December 4, 2009, the Rock Machine held its first national run in Australia, where over 80 members came together in Perth for the event. In the bikie culture, clashes are pretty much inevitable, and the established clubs were quick to notice the fresh faces. At first, the trouble was limited to pub brawls and street fights, but things really heated up when Critical J launched a Rock Machine chapter in the suburbs of Perth. This move was seen as a direct threat by other rival motorcycle clubs, especially the Rebels, who weren't too thrilled about sharing their turf. The Rebels are a massive force in Australia's bikie world. At its peak, the club had around 70 chapters scattered across the country and over 1,000 members, making them by far the largest motorcycle club in Australia. But it's not just their size that gets them noticed. They've also been suspected of all kinds of activities, from drug trafficking to extortion, even tax evasion. On the flip side, the Rock Machine was the new kid on the block. Despite being smaller, they didn't shy away from taking on a giant like the rebels. The rivalry started off small. Australian authorities say it kicked off with online threats and trash talk between members, but things really heated up when a few young rebels jumped ship to join the Rock Machine, eager to earn their full patch. By July 10, 2010, the tension finally boiled over in a violent brawl at a nightclub, leaving multiple people, including some police officers, injured. A few months later, in October 2010, the Rock Machine stepped up their game by firebombing a car owned by a Rebels member. Then came November 5, 2010, when things really exploded. At a mixed martial arts event, about 20 people from both clubs threw down in a wild fight, and according to witnesses, several rebels were injured. Just a week later, on November 12th, a group of 15 rebels decided to ride through Fremantle's entertainment district. Their mission was to find any Rock Machine member bold enough to flash their colors, but the search turned up nothing. 4 days later, the Rock Machine struck back by setting fire to the Inca Salt Tattoo Shop, a business linked to the rebels. The fire broke out early in the morning, and when the firefighters got there, it was clear that it was no accident. Police later confirmed that the arson was linked to the Rock Machine. As the violence escalated, things got even more destructive. A rebel's car was hit in a firebomb attack, while another member's home was trashed and ransacked. On November 29, 2010, police pulled over a Rock Machine member during a traffic stop and found an arsenal of high-powered guns, including rifles, a shotgun, and plenty of ammo. With each side upping the ante, the war was far from over. As 2011 kicked off, members of both clubs clashed yet again in January, this time at the Click nightclub in Fremantle, which left several people injured. Just the next day, a Rock Machine member discovered his Spearwood tattoo parlor wrecked, with the manager beaten by a group of rebels. That same month, on January 24, 2011, police took action by ramming an armored vehicle through the front gate of the rebels' Osborne Chapter clubhouse. Tactical response officers stormed the scene, using an angle grinder to cut through a security gate and tossing stun grenades inside. After all that effort, the police reported finding nothing of value during the raid. This led to the rebels' Western Australia President Nick Martin publicly demanding that the government pay for the damage to their clubhouse. The next month, on February 25th, the police raided the Rock Machine's clubhouse in Perth and found a huge stash of high-grade explosives. We're not just talking a small amount either. Police seized enough detonators and industrial-strength power gel to blow up a large building. Despite the massive raid and explosives bust, things escalated even further on March 18, 2011, when Nick Martin, the former president of the rebels' Western Australia chapter, became the target of an assassination attempt right outside his Perth home, where he was struck by a bullet that pierced his elbow. Luckily, Martin was able to walk away from that assassination with minor surgery, and he later got a tattoo around the bullet scar saying "better luck next time." Just days later, on March 24, 2011, police cracked down hard on both clubs, raiding 9 different properties across Australia. These raids uncovered a stash of weapons, including over a dozen rifles, a military practice mortar, and hundreds of rounds of ammo. But despite the scale of the operation, only 2 people were actually charged. The police did, however, manage to charge a Rock Machine member for the earlier attempt on Martin's life. In early 2012, the Rock Machine strengthened their presence in Perth by establishing a second chapter known as the Southside or City Crew Perth chapter. This expansion was fueled by a wave of defections from the Finks Motorcycle Club, with several members making the switch to the Rock Machine in January of that year. The Finks, like the Rock Machine, had long been at odds with the rebels. Even more Finks members from Eastern Australia began to flock to the Rock Machine as authorities in Queensland had slapped them with a criminal organisation label, tightening the noose on their operations. As for Brent Recker, he was arrested along with another member for extortion and making threats in 2011. The issue started when a group of young men falsely claimed to be connected to the Rock Machine. In response, Recker and a few other members confronted them at a tattoo shop in Spearwood. The young men were given a choice: either attack their own friend who had started the rumors or pay $2,000. Instead of giving in, they reported the situation to the police, leading to Recker receiving a 3-year prison sentence. He was eventually granted parole in 2013 under the condition not to contact any members, nominees, or associates of any outlaw motorcycle club. Years later, he re-emerged in the East as the new national president of the Finks. Amidst all the chaos between the 2 clubs, it seemed like the Rock Machine was starting to gain the upper hand. Many experts on motorcycle clubs pointed out that their unpredictable and bold attacks made it tough for the rebels and even the authorities to keep up. The Rock Machine followed a strategy for growth by expanding quietly and staying under the radar. It's even been openly talked about how the Rock Machine doesn't usually wear memorabilia when entering new territory. As one of the members put it, your next-door neighbor could be a member of the Rock Machine and you wouldn't even know it. While they rode their Harley-Davidsons like the rest, they didn't really stick to the traditional leather jackets and club patches. Instead, they were often sporting rings with the iconic eagle emblem. This low-profile approach made it difficult for rivals and law enforcement to track their movements. And that wasn't the first time the Rock Machine played the long game. Back in 2007, after the Quebec Biker War, many members and supporters in Canada were being released from charges. The club had gone underground for a while, only to come back stronger, growing quietly as they waited for their numbers to rise. At one point, Australian authorities even noticed a spike in online searches about how to join the Rock Machine. But there was a catch. While their numbers were growing, the quality of recruits wasn't exactly top tier. Most of the new members were young and undisciplined, making it harder for the club to maintain control. Internal conflicts inside of the club began brewing, with many of these new bikies doing whatever they pleased. This made it easier for law enforcement to infiltrate the group and start dismantling it from the inside. In November 2012, Western Australia passed one of the toughest laws aimed at cracking down on organized crime, especially targeting motorcycle clubs. The law allowed police to apply to a judge and request that certain groups be labeled as criminal organizations if they were involved in illegal activity or posed a public threat. Even though it took about a year for the law to fully kick in, it started making some younger members think twice about sticking around. On top of that, frequent police raids added even more pressure on the Rock Machine. By 2013, the club found itself in a tough spot, and one of their Perth chapters switched allegiances to the Bandidos. Though the Rock Machine seemed down for the count, they were far from finished. For the next couple of years, the club remained quiet, and while the authorities couldn't really pinpoint their activities, they knew the Rock Machine wasn't completely gone. By 2015, the rumors about the Rock Machine making a comeback were getting louder. Reports from local outlets mentioned that the club was active again in places like Christie's Beach and Seaford. In 2018, sightings of the Rock Machine were confirmed, sporting their emblem with the words Rock Machine Nomads. Shortly after that, the authorities confirmed that the Rock Machine resumed operations by reopening their Perth clubhouse. This only reignited tensions with the rebels, and the streets were once again buzzing with reports of arson and drive-by shootings. Then came December 12, 2020. On that sunny afternoon at Perth Motorplex, families were enjoying a drag racing event, unaware of the danger that was about to occur. Among the crowd was Nick Martin, the former president of the Rebels. As he watched the event, a bullet suddenly cut through the air, hitting him in the chest. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to safety, unsure if more shots were coming as Martin passed on the spot. Authorities immediately launched an investigation, with over 100 officers tasked with finding who was behind the hit. Task Force Revello smashed in doors, raided properties, and locked up people in the hunt for the shooter. While no one was officially named at the time, all eyes naturally turned to the Rock Machine. However, 3 months later, an ex-army sharpshooter was arrested and sentenced to 20 years. The shooter had made a crucial mistake. He'd taken his rifle to a licensed gunsmith for a barrel replacement a month after the shooting. This slip-up allowed investigators to trace the modified weapon and match it to the bullet recovered from the scene. The police also discovered another crucial piece of evidence, a shoe impression. It was identified as a feeler-running shoe. CCTV footage later confirmed that the shooter had been at the Perth Motorplex multiple times, and each time they were spotted wearing those exact shoes. Mobile phone towers placed the suspect right at the sniper's position just before Nick Martin was hit. Shortly after, the phone was switched off, signaling a deliberate move to evade tracking. But by then, the pieces were already starting to come together. Police put the shooter under surveillance and later followed him to a bushland in Warnbro, where they discovered $249,550 buried in PVC pipes. During sentencing, the shooter cooperated with authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence, identifying David Pye, a former Rebels member, as the person who had hired him. The shooter also mentioned how he surveilled Martin's movements, conducted drone flybys around his house, and even practiced his shot before he pulled the trigger from 300 meters away at the Motorplex. He claimed that he was to be paid $150,000 for the hit, and police allege Pai also offered to pay the same shooter to take out a woman and a senior Comanchero, Ray Tsili, who is living in Thailand. However, David Pai pled not guilty to all charges when he appeared in court. On December 25, 2020, curious onlookers watched as 200 patched rebels escorted Nick Martin's coffin, which was decorated with $100 bills. A convoy of police cars trailed behind, while a police sniper in a helicopter kept watch from above. Despite this grand display of brotherhood, tensions within the rebels had been brewing for months. Suspicion had surfaced that Martin had misappropriated club funds, and he was ousted from his leadership position after being blamed for the transfer of members to the Mongols earlier in 2020. The plot thickened when police discovered that during Martin's funeral, his home had been robbed, with over $20,000 stolen from his widow. Fast forward to 2024, and both clubs are still active in Australia. The Rock Machine now boasts 11 chapters across the country, while the Rebels maintain their title as Australia's largest outlaw motorcycle club. With tensions still running high, the future of these clubs remains uncertain. Only time will tell what happens next.